I have two brief questions I'd like to ask, if I may.
Hi, welcome to Left Foot Media. My name is Brendan Malone and you're watching The Daily Question. Today's question of the day comes from the viewer mailbag, and Morden has sent me the following email. Here in the US, our media gripes about white privilege a lot, even though they have no idea what any of us have experienced, how we grew up, where we grew up, etc. We are told constantly in the media, though, that we're privileged. And these stories are making headlines every day. It consumes almost all of our entertainment. It's inserted itself into our schools and even into our universities. But wouldn't the ability to complain about privilege actually mean that you are privileged? Well, Morden, I don't know if it means that you are privileged, the fact that you can talk a lot about the privilege of other people that you think that they have. But I would suggest that if you believe that you are majorly oppressed, and yet you are living in a society where not only can you talk openly and freely about that oppression, but your ideas about that oppression are sort of celebrated and talked about and enshrined in some of the most privileged positions within society and some of her more important institutions, it sort of does tend to suggest that perhaps you're not as oppressed as you might believe yourself to be, that things possibly aren't quite as bad as you sort of think they are. The whole question of privilege for me, I think, is a complex one. And I think this is where it breaks down, is this modern tendency, particularly those who buy into a lot of the identity politics, to try and claim that privilege is this absolute black and white simplistic thing, and that you have entire groups of people based on their biological sex, so usually males, or based on their race, usually white, automatically enjoy privilege and are in a privileged class above everyone else who is not in that same grouping as them. And I don't buy into that for a second, because, I mean, my own life is testament to that fact. But privilege, where it does exist, and there's no denying that privilege can and does exist in society. I think it's just as silly to say that privilege isn't a thing. However, it's a complex thing. It's nonsense to take this black and white and simplistic approach to say that you automatically have it just because you're a man, and you automatically have it just because you're white. That's not how life works. And if you take a little bit of time to look at the daily experiences of people, and you look beyond your own little world, you realize that in actual fact, that privilege isn't so simplistic at all. In fact, it's very, very complex, the way in which people might experience privileges or benefits in society over other people or other groups. For example, when it comes to the issue of male-female relations, the constant thing that you will hear from certain groups is the claim that men are privileged when it comes to male-female relations. And in society, men have male privilege, and therefore women are in a lesser class than men as a result of this. However, that's not really true when you stop and think about, say, an issue like, for example, abortion. When it comes to the issue of abortion, a woman can actually can pay an abortionist to end the life of her unborn child. She doesn't need to get permission from the father of that child. She doesn't even need to tell the father of that child that that's happened. However, if a male did that, so he paid an abortionist to abort his unborn child without the consent of the mother of the child, he would actually go to jail for doing that. Not only that, but outside of abortion, a man can't be pro-choice about parenthood. So a man couldn't say, well, I'm pro-choice on the question of paying alimony or child support, and I had sex, but I didn't want to make a baby, so I'm not going to pay child support, I'm not going to pay alimony. He can be taken to court and forced to actually make those payments. So in that regard, the situation of male-female relations, all of a sudden you see that in actual fact the privilege lies with females and not with males. It's a lot more complex. There isn't this blanket privilege that men automatically have. And saying that, there is still a sense of privilege that men can wield in these scenarios where they have the ability, because they are the ones who don't end up pregnant, they can just up and leave anytime they like. So it's a complex interplay how this all works. There isn't just this automatic blanket privilege that one group of people has because of their biological sex. And I would argue the same is true of race and racial issues. It's a lot more complex than what some people are trying to make it. I think the only two things that really guarantee you genuine privilege in society are actually wealth and power. And usually those two things go hand in hand. The more wealthy you are, generally the more powerful you are. You have a greater level of influence in society. You also have the ability to insulate yourself against things that people who have lesser means cannot insulate themselves against. So the more money you have, the better the level of health care that you can afford, for example. The more money you have, the greater the quality and the level of legal representation that you can afford if you find yourself in the criminal justice system. A great example of this would be the case of O.J. Simpson. O.J. Simpson was a black man, but he also had a lot of wealth. And because of his wealth, he was able to insulate himself against those crimes. Like if a lesser well-off white man had been charged with that exact same crime and gone before the courts, it's almost certain he would have been found guilty. It had nothing to do with race. It had everything to do with the money that was involved. And my life is very much, I guess you'd say, a testament to that. I'm a white guy, but growing up, I certainly didn't experience what sometimes people term white privilege. I grew up in a household which was a working class family until my father was invalided out of his job, and he went on what is known in New Zealand as a sickness benefit. And a sickness benefit is basically a welfare payment for people who are unable to work because of some sort of physical inability. And that was my father's experience, and the sickness benefit doesn't pay a lot. And so we grew up in a welfare class family. We went from being working class to welfare. And there were times where we didn't even know where the next meal was coming from. We were a family that did not have a lot of wealth. We were a family that the community that I lived in, my best friend at school was a Māori guy. Some of my close circle of friends at school were Polynesian guys. We sort of just were in it together. We didn't really look around the room and have that sense of, well, I'm in a better position than you are. Our parents were sort of facing the same sort of issues, and they were dealing with trying to do the best they could with the limited means that they had. None of us were really any more privileged than any of the rest of us. There might have been certain scenarios perhaps where you could say, and this is where the sort of complexity comes in, where perhaps my being white might have given me a certain advantage, but there wasn't a blanket across the board advantage at all. And we certainly never lived in such a way where we were more privileged than the people that we associated with who weren't white. And I think this is the complexity of how this actually all plays out. And I think, as I said, the only thing that really does guarantee you a certain level of privilege is wealth and power. If you've got those things, then I think you're definitely going to be advantaged as you move your way through life. And it's interesting, a lot of my friends who are white, who sort of bang on about privilege a lot, I look at their lives and I think, yeah, you can probably say that because you grew up in a household that had a lot more money than the household I grew up in, and we just didn't really think or didn't experience the privilege that perhaps you did. But it had nothing to do with ethnicity and everything to do with the wealth that was in your household. It's interesting to me why this sort of constant obsession with privilege now has become such an obsession for a lot of people. This sort of constant desire to perpetrate this idea that you are automatically privileged because of your biological sex or because of your race. I think it really does play into this idea of trying to create an oppressor class and an oppressed class. And if you can automatically fit yourself into the oppressed class, regardless of whether you're oppressed or not, I think it's a much better position to be in if you want to sort of view the world and have the world be viewed through that lens of oppressor and oppression, and to be sort of engaged in what you consider to be, one of the greatest civil rights battles of human history. And so in order for that to be the case, you've really got to create the oppression in the oppressor class. And I think, as I said, the way people do that is by being simplistic, by not looking at the nuance, and by not actually acknowledging that privilege is a very complex thing. And just because someone might have it in one scenario, it doesn't mean that they enjoy a blanket across-the-board privilege at all, regardless of whether they are male or female, regardless of what their ethnicity is. It really, I think, the only thing that actually guarantees you any sense of privilege in this life and can insulate you from a lot of things that other people don't experience, as I said, is wealth. That is the one thing, that will actually give you the ability to avoid many of the pitfalls that everyone else has just sort of got to experience in life. It gives you the ability to, even if difficult things happen to you, to be able to get yourself out of them very, very quickly, as opposed to others who don't have the means to do that. As per usual, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so please let me know what you think in the comments section below. And if you like the content I'm creating and you'd like to see more of it, then please support me on Patreon for as little as $1 a month. There's a link in the description below and a link on screen at the end of this video. That's right, I can hear my theme music too. I'll see you tomorrow on The Daily Question.